The Loss of the Ramilies by Alfred H. Miles. Bygh Walker. Admiral, afterwards Lord Graves, having requested leave to return to England in 1782, was appointed by Lord Rodney to command the convoy sent home with a numerous fleet of merchantmen from the West Indies in the month of July. He accordingly hoisted the flag on board the Ramilies, of 74 guns, and sailed on the 25th from Bluefields, having under his orders the Canada and Centaur, of 74 guns each, with the Perilous frigate of 36 guns, and the following French ships taken by Lord Rodney and Sir Samuel Hood, out of the armament commanded by the Count de Grasse, viz. The Ville de Paris of 110 guns, the Gloria and Hector of 74 guns each, the Ardent, Catton, and Jason of 64 guns each. These were originally British ships, and had been in so many actions, and so long absent from England, as to have become extremely out of condition, while that of the prizes was still more deplorable. And the following authentic account of the various disasters which attended this distressed convoy will be found equally melancholy and interesting. Soon after the fleet had sailed, the officers of the Ardent united in signing such a representation of her miserable plight as induced Admiral Graves to order her back to Port Royal, and the Jason, by not putting to sea with the convoy, from the want of water, never joined him at all. The rest proceeded, and after the vessels that were bound for New York had separated, the whole convoy was reduced to 92 or 3 sail. On September 8th, the Catton, springing a leak, made such alarming complaints that the Admiral directed her and the Perilous, which had also become leaky, to bear away immediately and keep company together, making for Halifax, which then bore north-northwest and was about 87 leagues distant. The afternoon of September 16th, showing indications of a gale and foul weather from the southeast quarter, every preparation was made on board the flagship for such an event, not only on account of her own safety, but also by way of example to the rest of the fleet. The Admiral collected the ships about 6 o'clock, and brought to under his main sail on the larboard tack, having all his other sails furled, and his topgallant yards and masts lowered down. The wind, soon increasing, blew strongly from the east-southeast with a very heavy sea, and about 3 o'clock in the morning of the 17th flew suddenly round to the contrary point, blowing most tremendously, and accompanied with rain, thunder, and lightning. The Ramilies was taken by the lee, her main sail thrown aback, her main mast went by the board, and her mizzen mast halfway up. The foretop mast fell over the starboard bow, the foreyard broke in the slings, the tiller snapped in two, and the rudder was nearly torn off. Thus was this capital ship, from being in perfect order, reduced within a few minutes to a mere wreck, by the fury of the blast and the violence of the sea which acted in opposition to each other. The ship was pooped, the cabin where the Admiral lay was flooded, his cot bed jerked down by the violence of the shock and the ship's instantaneous revulsion, so that he was obliged to pull on his boots half-leg deep in water, without any stockings, to huddle on his wet clothes and repair upon deck. On his first coming hither, he ordered 2 of the lieutenants to examine into the state of the affairs below, and to keep a sufficient number of people at the pumps, while he himself and the captain kept the deck, to encourage the men to clear away the wreck, which by its constant swinging backwards and forwards by every wave against the body of the ship, had beaten off much of the copper from the starboard side, and exposed the seams so much to the sea that the decayed oakum washed out, and the whole frame became at once exceedingly porous and leaky. At dawn of day they perceived a large ship under their lee, lying upon her side, waterlogged, her hands attempting to wear her by first cutting away the mizzen mast, and then main mast, hoisting her ensign with the union downwards in order to draw the attention of the fleet. But to no purpose, for no succor could be given, and she very soon went down head foremost, the fly of her ensign being the last thing visible. This was the Dutton, formerly an Indiaman, and then a store ship, commanded by a lieutenant of the navy, who in his agitation leaped from her deck into the sea, but, as might be expected, was very soon overwhelmed by the billows. 12 or 13 of the crew contrived, however, to slip off with one of the boats, and running with the wind, endeavored to reach a large ship before them, failing in which, however, and afraid of filling if they attempted to haul up for that purpose, they made up for another ship more to the leeward, who, fortunately descrying them, threw a number of ropes, by the help of which these desperate fellows scrambled up her sides and fortunately saved their lives. Out of 94 or 95 sail seen the day before, scarcely 20 could now be counted. Of the ships of war there were discovered the Canada half hull down upon the lee quarter, having her maintop mast and mizzen mast gone, the maintop damaged, the main yard aloft, and the main sail furled. The Centaur was far to windward, without masts, bowsprit, or rudder, and the Gloria without foremast, bowsprit, or maintop mast. Of these the two latter perished with all their crews, excepting the captain of the Centaur and a few of his people, who contrived to slip off her stern into one of the boats unnoticed, and thus escaped the fate of the rest. The Ville de Paris appeared to have received no injury, and was commanded by a most experienced seaman, who had made 24 voyages to and from the West Indies, and had therefore been pitched upon to lead the ship through the Gulf. Nevertheless, she was afterwards buried in the ocean with all on board her, consisting of above 800 people. Of the convoy, besides the Dutton before mentioned and the British Queen, 7 others were discovered without mast or bowsprit, 18 lost masts, and several others had actually foundered. In the course of this day the Canada crossed upon and passed the Ramilies. Some of the trade attempted to follow the Canada, but she ran at such a rate that they soon found it to be in vain, and then returned to the flagship. The Ramilies had at this time 6 feet of water in her hold, and the pumps would not free her, the water having worked out the oakum, and her beams amidship being almost drawn from her clamps. The admiral therefore gave orders for all the buckets to be manned, and every officer to help towards freeing the ship. The mizzen topsail was set upon the foremast, the main topgallant sail on the stump of the mizzen mast, and the tiller shipped. In this condition, by bearing away, she scudded on at so good a rate that she held pace with some of the merchantmen. The day having been spent in bailing and pumping, with materially gaining on the water, the captain, in the name of the officers, represented to the admiral the necessity of parting with the guns for the relief of the ship. But he objected that there would then be left no protection for the convoy. At length, however, he consented to their disposing of the forecastle and aftermost quarterdeck guns, together with some of the shot, and other articles of very great weight. The ensuing night was employed in bailing and endeavoring to make the pumps useful, for the ballast, by getting into the well, had choked and rendered them useless, and the chains had broken as often as they were repaired. The water had risen to 7 feet in the hold. The wind from the eastward drove a vast sea before it, and the ship, being old, strained most violently. On the morning of the 18th, nothing could be seen of the Canada, she having pushed on at her greatest speed for England. The frame of the Ramilies having opened during the night, the admiral was prevailed upon, by the renewed and pressing remonstrances of his officers, although with great reluctance, to let 6 of the forwardmost and 4 of the aftermost guns of the main deck be thrown overboard, together with the remainder of those on the quarterdeck, and the ship still continuing to open very much, he ordered tarred canvas and hides to be nailed fore and aft from under the sills of the ports on the main deck under the 5th plank above, or within the water ways. And the crew, without orders, did the same on the lower deck. Her increasing complaints required still more to be done. The admiral directed all the guns on the upper deck, the shot, both on that and the lower deck, and various heavy stores, to be thrown overboard. A leakage in the lightroom of the grand magazine having almost filled the ship forward, and there being 8 feet of water in the magazine, every gentleman was compelled to take his turn at the whips, or in handing the buckets. The ship was besides frapped from the foremast to the main mast. Notwithstanding their utmost efforts, the water still gained on them the succeeding night, and the wind blowing very hard, with extremely heavy squalls, a part of the orlop deck fell into the hold. The ship herself seemed to work excessively, and to settle forward. On the morning of the 19th, under these very alarming circumstances, the admiral commanded both the bower anchors to be cut away, all the junk to be flung overboard, 1 sheet and 1 bower cable to be reduced to junk and served the same way, together with every remaining ponderous store that could be got at, and all the powder in the grand magazine, it being damaged. The cutter and pinnace to be broken up and tossed overboard. The skids having already worked off the side, every soul on board was now employed in bailing. One of the pumps was got up, but to no purpose, for the shot lockers being broken down, some of the shot, as well as the ballast, had fallen into the well, and as the weather moderated a little, everything was made ready for heaving the lower deck guns into the sea, the admiral being anxious to leave nothing undone for the relief of the ship. When evening approached, there being 20 merchant ships in sight, the officers united in beseeching him to go into one of them. But this he positively refused to do, deeming it, as he declared, unpardonable in a commander-in-chief to desert his garrison in distress, that his living a few years longer was of very little consequence, but that, by leaving his ship at such a time, he should discourage and slacken the exertions of the people by setting them a very bad example. The wind lulling somewhat during the night, all hands bailed the water, which, at this time, was 6 feet fore and aft. On the morning of the 20th, the admiral ordered the square and stream anchors to be cut away, and within the course of the day, all the lower-deck guns to be thrown overboard. When evening came, the spirits of the people in general, and even of the most courageous, began to fail, and they openly expressed the utmost despair, together with the most earnest desire of quitting the ship, lest they should founder in her. The admiral hereupon advanced and told them that he and their officers had an equal regard for their own lives, that the officers had no intention of deserting either them or the ship, that, for his part, he was determined to try one night more in her. He therefore hoped and entreated they would do so too, for there was still room to imagine that one fair day, with a moderate sea, might enable them, by united exertion, to clear and secure the well against the encroaching ballast which washed into it, that if this could be done, they might be able to restore the chains to the pumps and use them, and that then hands enough might be spared to raise jury masts, with which they might carry the ship into Ireland, that her appearance alone, while she could swim, would be sufficient to protect the remaining part of her convoy. Above all, that, as everything that could be thought of had now been done for her relief, it would be but reasonable to wait the effect. He concluded with assuring them that he would make the signal directly for the trade to lie by them during the night, which he doubted not they would comply with. This temperate speech had the desired effect. The firmness and confidence with which he spoke, and their reliance on his seamanship and judgment, as well as his constant presence and attention to every accident, had a wonderful effect upon them. They became pacified, returning to their duty and their labors. Since the first disaster, the admiral had in fact scarcely ever quitted the deck. This they had all observed, together with his diligence in personally inspecting every circumstance of distress. Knowing his skill and experience, they placed great confidence in them, and he instantly made, according to his promise, a signal for all the merchantmen. At this period, it must be confessed, there was great reason for alarm, and but little for hope. For all the anchors and guns, excepting one, together with every other matter of weight, had been thrown overboard, and yet the ship did not seem to be at all relieved. The strength of the people was likewise so nearly exhausted, having had no sleep since the first fatal stroke, that one half of the crew were ordered to bail, and the other to repose. So that, although the wind was much abated, the water still gained upon them, in spite of all their efforts, and the ship rolled and worked prodigiously in a most unquiet sea. At 3 in the morning of the 21st, being the 4th night, the well being broken in, the casks, ballast, and remaining shot rushed together and destroyed the cylinder of the pumps. The frame and carcase of the ship began to give way in every part, and the whole crew exclaimed that it was impossible to keep her any longer above water. In this extremity, the admiral resolved within himself not to lose a moment in removing the people whenever daylight should arrive, but told the captain not to communicate any more of his design than that he intended to remove the sick and lame at daybreak, and for this purpose he should call on board all the boats of the merchantmen. He nevertheless gave private orders to the captain, while this was doing, to have all the bread brought upon the quarterdeck, with a quantity of beef, pork, and flour, to settle the best distributing of the people according to the number of trade ships that should obey their signal, and to allow an officer to each division of them, to have the remaining boats launched, and as soon as the sick were disposed of, to begin to remove the whole of the crew with the utmost dispatch, but without risking too many in a boat. Accordingly, at dawn, the signal was made for the boats of the merchantmen, but nobody suspected what was to follow, until the bread was entirely removed and the sick gone. About 6 o'clock the rest of the crew were permitted to go off, and between 9 and 10, there being nothing farther to direct and regulate, the admiral himself, after shaking hands with every officer, and leaving his barge for their better accommodation and transport, quitted for ever the Ramilies, which had then 9 feet of water in her hold. He went into a small leaky boat, loaded with bread, out of which both himself and the surgeon who accompanied him were obliged to bail the water all the way. He was in his boots, with his surtout over his uniform, and his countenance as calm and composed as ever. He had at the going off desired a cloak, a cask of flour, and a cask of water, but could get only the flour. and he left behind all his stock, wines, furniture, books, charts, etc., which had cost him upwards of £1,000, being unwilling to employ even a single servant in saving or packing up what belonged to himself alone, in a time of such general calamity, or to appear to fare better in that respect than any of the crew. The admiral rowed for the Belle, Captain Forster, being the first of the traders that had borne up to the Ramilies the preceding night in her imminent distress, and by his anxious humanity set such an example to his brother traders as had a powerful influence upon them, an influence that was generally followed by 16 others. By 3 o'clock most of the crew were taken out, at which time the Ramilies had 13 feet of water in her hold, and was evidently foundering in every part. At 4:30 the captain and first and third lieutenants left her, with every soul excepting the fourth lieutenant, who stayed behind only to execute the admiral's orders for setting fire to her wreck when finally deserted. The carcase burned rapidly, and the flame quickly reaching the powder, which was filled in the after magazine and had been lodged very high. In 35 minutes, the decks and upper works blew up with a horrid explosion and cloud of smoke, while the lower part of the hull was precipitated to the bottom of the ocean. At this time the admiral in the Belle stood for the wreck to see his last orders executed, as well as to succor any boats that might be too full of men, the swell of the sea being prodigious, although the weather had been moderate ever since noon of the foregoing day. There were, however, at intervals, some squalls, with threats of the weather soon becoming violent. It was not long before they were realized, for within 2 hours after the last of the crew were put on board their respective ships, the wind rose to a great height, and so continued, without intermission, for 6 or 7 successive days, so that no boat could, during that time, have lived in the water. On such a small interval depended the salvation of more than 600 lives. Upon their separation taking place, the officers who were distributed with portions of the crew among the Jamaica men had orders respectively to deliver them to the first man of war or tender they should meet with, and to acquaint the Secretary of the Admiralty by the earliest opportunity of their proceedings. A pendant was hoisted on board the Belle, by way of distinction that she might, if possible, lead the rest. Some of the traders kept with her, and others made the best of their way, apprehensive lest they should soon fall short of provisions, as they had so many more to feed. The Silver Eel transport, which had sailed from Bluefields with the invalids of Sir George Rodney's fleet, and was under the command of a lieutenant of the Navy, had been ordered to keep near the Ramilies. That ship was accordingly at hand on September 21st, the day of her destruction, and in consequence of several deaths on the passage, had room enough for the reception of all those that were now ailing or maimed, and was consequently charged with them, being first properly fitted for their accommodation. The Silver Eel parted from the Admiral in latitude 42 degrees 48 N and longitude 45 degrees 19 W, after seeing the Ramilies demolished, and being ordered to make for the first port, ran into Falmouth, October 6th, on the afternoon of which day one of the trade ships, with a midshipman and 16 of the crew of the Ramilies, reached Plymouth Sound. Another of the same convoy having on board another portion of the crew, with the captain and first lieutenant, anchored in the same place before daylight the next morning. The Canada, however, having exerted her utmost speed, had prior to all these, on the 4th of the same month got to Portsmouth, where she spread the news of the dispersion of this miserable fleet, which being conveyed to France, her privateers immediately put to sea in hopes of making prize of them. Some of the Jamaica men, with part of the crew of the Ramilies, fell in consequence into their hands. 2 of the West India men were captured in sight of the Belle, but she herself, with the admiral and 33 of his crew, arrived safe though singly on October 10th in Cork Harbour, where was the Myrmidon frigate. The admiral immediately hoisted his flag on board the latter, and sailing with the first fair wind, arrived on the 17th in Plymouth Sound.